Okay, so now onto the charcoal badger. I just want to point out something that might be super useful for you, because you might notice the badger is sitting in or curled up in a perfect circle, and I've managed to achieve that by cutting myself out a bit of a stencil, the very first thing that I did. So if you put your A2 cartridge paper down on the table or on the easel, then if you've got a cheaper sheet of A3, or if you don't, sellotape 2 A4s together, that will do you just fine. And place that across the A2 paper, so you've got a sense of where you want your badger to land. Then go and rummage for a dinner plate, and that dinner plate, hopefully that you've got in the cupboard, will sit neatly on top of an A3 piece of paper. Draw around the dinner plate so you've got a nice circle, and then cut that circle out. And that will act as a little bit of a shape stencil to begin with. We won't use it for very long, and you'll see just in a second how I've put it onto my my board and my cartridge paper. Some masking tape is useful just to hold it in position, and it doesn't have to be fancy paper, just printer paper will be absolutely fine, and you should be able to achieve a nice circle by doing that. Okay, on to the onto the actual lesson. So you will see that I use my Willow charcoal up against the edge of the circle stencil to begin with. So I'm establishing that circle early on. And I'm applying it quite lightly because I know I'm going to build up a few layers, and I'm kind of crossing over the stencil and onto the cartridge paper at the same time. And I'm starting to fill in some darker areas that I want to layer up. So you'll start to see that I'm mapping out where the shape of the badger arms are, where the head is, where the folds are. And if you look at the video just now, you'll see almost like a moon and like a crescent moon, and that's kind of the highlight on the badger that I'm trying to protect at this stage. Once I've got a layer down, I can then softly burnish in with my fingers, just pushing that charcoal into the weave of the cartridge paper. And it might be that this takes you a few layers to build up a nice depth of dark black. And you can see mine at the moment is a mid-grey, and that's quite typical for a first pass on charcoal. I'm going in for a second layer, and I'm starting to push a bit harder and burnish a bit firmer as well. So once you've got a sense of how your materials are reacting to your paper, you can get an idea of how dark you can go with this layer. And it's better, I think, to build up in thinner layers before you go dark. So I've got a couple of thin layers on, and now I'm going in and I'm finding those dark, shadowy areas and maybe contours that I want to make sure that I'm describing with my darkest darks. And it looks a really weird abstract shape at this stage. It's quite satisfying though, burnishing that dark material in and starting to describe dark, medium and light is actually going to be the success of the painting. So I'm going in for another layer, and I'm trying to make the edges really dark as well, and that will kind of send the curve of the badger under, and it will contrast really well once we take that paper stencil off, once we take the circle off. So I'm pushing quite hard here. I'm using the tip of the charcoal willow stick, which is often the easiest way to get a darker pass. And I can then start to come in and start to find out which other dark areas, using the same method, need a bit more attention. I was so tempted at this stage and several other stages throughout this painting that I wanted to turn the painting upside down, so I was drawing the badger the right way up, because obviously it's curled around and the head is upside down. But I think if you did that, it would read slightly off balance if you did that. So if you can, try and keep it upside down. I'm going in now and I'm trying to identify a few more distinguishing marks and lines, and I'm starting to get a bit more particular about the direction of line that I'm applying. If you think everything is in the round, so it's got to somehow all go, if you think of it all going clockwise, that might help. As soon as I say that, I go anti-clockwise on that little leg there. So that little, it looks like bum cheeks at the moment. But that's where the legs and the paws are tucked in underneath the head. And I'm getting a darker shadow on the top of the head there. And I've attached the usual shape sheet in your downloads, but I've also exaggerated the dark, medium and light shapes, so you can really sort of pull those out and glance at that help sheet as you're applying your charcoal and use it as a bit of a map. Now here I'm using a rubber, either the corner or the edge of the rubber, to start to pull back and describe hairs. Now, I know I say this an awful lot, but direction is super important here. You want to keep that curve going around. And it doesn't matter if you rub too much out, because you can reapply just as I am here. And all the while you're checking shapes, and you're making sure that the angles are suited to the shape of the animal as it curves around. So onto the rubber now, and really going to town on describing the hair. Now, badger's hair is quite coarse, so you'll get away with quite sort of immediate, thick, erased lines. Don't think you've got to be too delicate here. And it's really satisfying when you go over a dark bit, because it describes it with even more detail. But of course, the danger is, as you're working your way around applying the rubber and making these marks, you can run the risk of making everything just look quite flat and quite medium grey. And if that's the case, all you need to do is go back in and re-establish your darks. Now, as I curve round towards the head, I want to almost knit the white into the black and the black into the white. So very often I'll pull the rubber over the white into the dark, just as I'm doing here, just so I get that sort of knitting over effect. And it almost layers one stripe onto, it almost layers one lighter stripe onto a darker area. And could you see there that I just added a slight curve just to exaggerate that curve of the neck? And I'm starting to tidy up as I go. So I'm using a dry, make sure it's dry, big decorator's brush. And I'm just giving it a little waft over just to take off any loose charcoal, but also to get any rubber marks, rubber shavings away. Now you can gently shade with the rubber as well, just as I'm doing here. And it's almost like you're tapping the rubber rather than rubbing away. And it just gives you another way of describing a shade or a slightly more subtle highlight. Now here I've actually got a pencil rubber, and it's one of those, it's like a typewriter rubber, if you remember those, where there was a little brush on the end of it, and sometimes they're a bit firmer. And Rachel at Spotty Dog, she gave me the tip that they're quite good. So I've just had a go with one of those to sort of see if I can shape the eye with that. But I quite like the block rubbers that I've been using mostly. Now, I'm here with a hard charcoal pencil, and I'm going in to establish my darks and be more precise about where they're going as well. So you don't want to be picking up this dark pencil until this sort of stage, because if you get into the darks too early, it can be a bit of a tussle and a bit of a fight, and you might smudge it. So you may as well wait for that detail towards the end, like you would with any painting, really. So I'm always looking to re-establish the darks. It's so easy to smudge them and they go into a mid value. So you can see I'm really pushing that Willow charcoal into the inner of the ear to get some shadow in there. And in a second, I will pick the dark pencil back up and start to be a bit bolder with some of the marks that I'm making there as well. So now's the exciting part coming up, where I'm going to take the circle stencil off, and I'm just going around that circle one last time to get a little bit more dark around. And this is where you'll peel away your masking tape and reveal your badger. How smart does that look? Stencils work wonders, don't they? So you might have a couple of smudges here and there, but we're going to dress it with some leaves and foliage just now. Now, with the leaves stencil, on this particular one, I chose to stick to the same leaf stencil all the way around, and it gave it quite a contemporary feel. Now, if you wanted something more natural, you might want to mix up your leaf shapes and go for big shapes and small shapes, and that way you'll make it more irregular, and nature obviously is more irregular. But the way I've gone about it on this particular one is I've used the same stencil. It looks more contemporary, but it feels very pattern based, which of course, is typical to achieve with a stencil unless you're interrupting it in some way. So the choice is yours, and it might be that you have stencils in your kit, or it could be that you draw some leaf shapes onto some printer paper and you cut those out and you make your own stencils going around. So my top tip with whichever stencils you decide to use, try and follow that clockwise direction and echo the circular motion that you've managed to describe. And it just nestles the badger into that kind of cozy feel if you do that. And you'll see that I'm using a brush to apply my charcoal through these stencils. So I've got some ground down willow charcoal, and I can, with a tiny bit of water, mix a paste with the willow charcoal and use my brush to apply it. And this works particularly well if you've got stencils that are either quite small and difficult to rub into, or if your stencils are quite sharp and it hurts your fingers to rub over them. So you can always use a brush like this. And you can, of course, also use makeup sponges. They work really well too. And there you have your badger charcoal painting, which is another nice charcoal animal to our collection of the ones that we've been doing so far. But it's also giving us a different sort of flex in terms of how we're using our materials, whether we're working big, whether we're working small. And I've got a feeling we're going to come back to the badger, because there's a third project, as I've mentioned in the other video, that I'm itching to do with you, but it would have made it far too long to add it onto this month, and I never want you to feel overwhelmed that you're not reaching the end of the projects. So I will find a way to weave that in, so expect this badger to make a return. And just while we're looking at the painting full on, if I can just point out to you that little shadow underneath the chin by the mouth, that just works wonders if you can sort of very softly smudge a shadow there. But keep the top of the head super white and clean, and that again just helps you turn that chin into the crook of that lovely little cozy ball that he's got himself into. Now, because it's a circle, it will look really good framed in a square frame, or because you've done it on A2 paper, it will also look good framed in portrait as well. So if any of you get a chance to send me a photo, if you do actually manage to frame yours up, I'd love to see them, and we can share them with everybody else and inspire them to do something similar. Anyway, thanks everybody, and I'll catch you again soon.